So I'd like to call to order the Merrimack School District SAU 26 School Board meeting for January 17, 2023. Will everyone all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Hopefully I will never have to use that. Welcome to our school board budget meeting. I want to welcome everyone tonight. I am opening the floor to public comment. If you would like to come, please step to the microphone and state your name and address. If you're a student, you never have to give us your address. So welcome, and anyone's welcome to speak. Of course, I can see who's here, so I wasn't anticipating anyone, but just like everyone that's watching at home know that we do always have a public participation. All right, tonight we are going to start with Heather Barker and Student Services. And the way we will do this is we will have each board member that submitted questions ask their questions, because sometimes we find out that our questions get answered earlier, or we'd like a reword, or those kinds of things. So.
Thank you for having us tonight. I've brought Olivia Seiden, our Director of Student Wellness. Okay.
Welcome. How are you?
We're great. Thanks for having us. Hang on 1 second. Let me just get this open so we can. Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay. So my first question had to do with summer school in 2022. So I didn't know if you could just give us an overview
Sure.
of summer school. I don't know. Are you going to speak first and then let us
Sure.
do
Would you like-
question, or
Yeah.
how do you want to do it?
So why don't I start, because you actually had left a spot up there for sort of an introductory statement. I saw last week or 2 weeks ago that the other presenters had an opportunity to share a little bit and then allowed you guys to ask the questions, so it had better flow than last year. So our current school year budget for special education this year is $13,661,485.15. Next year's school budget is proposed to be $14,141,021.48. That is an increase of $479,536.30. That overall increase represents 3.5%. People had actually, in some of their questions, asked about inflation. Certainly, inflation definitely is playing a role here. The cost of this increase is primarily due to the increased costs for out-of-district placements. Those are up 16%. Proposed for next year, they've already put that out. The increased cost of contracted services, this will be the second year in a row that there's been a request for a 3% increase from the related services that are contracted. And the increased number, and this is the first time I'm saying this at a public hearing, the increased number of students who are being served in our schools in Merrimack who are now receiving special education and the related services that go along with that, supplemental aids and supports, that has increased. So the number of students, we anticipated that. We predicted it in 2021 as we were coming out of the pandemic. Currently, we have 835 students being served in our schools with IEPs, our charter schools, and out of district. Last year, we served 756 students with IEPs at this time. So January of last year, as we were meeting, we had 756 students. So the pandemic, as we anticipated, has led to an increase of number of students who are being referred and are being found eligible for special education services. So that's definitely part of what's going on here, as well as those increased costs of services. What was not anticipated, I think, coming out of the pandemic for related services was they also having trouble. We've had trouble over the past 3 years hiring staff, MTA staff, MESA staff. our contracted service providers are now having trouble hiring staff. So that's been a challenge for them as well. So I'm sure part of their increase is incentivizing their services to get people to work for them as well. So I have been working closely this year with Assistant Superintendent Amy Doyle, Curriculum Instruction and Assessment, our Director of Student Wellness, and all of the administrators across the district to improve our universal core programs. That is critical and key to reducing the cost of special education in Merrimack, for sure. The Tier 2 interventions for academics, behavioral and social emotional supports for all students, and by working together on prevention and early intervention, not allowing those gaps to get so big that you're really requiring intensive special education to remediate them, we can decrease the number of students being referred for special education in the areas of literacy, mathematics, written language, social emotional skills, behavioral health, and well-being. So that would be the opener to the budget this year.
Okay. Thank you. So that was a great presentation and you answered a lot of my questions right there. So that was good. So we'll go back to the first question about
Yep.
summer programming, understanding how many students attend the summer programming. What is our goal? Do we do an evaluation after?
So Lori, this one was specifically to SEL, but I can just give an overarching
yes.
for the whole district. Last year, we served 206 students in the ESY programs here in Merrimack School District. So those are mandated. As we know, special education is an entitlement, and while students have IEPs, we are obligated and bound to provide those services. So keeping with the theme of the previous 2 years, we did provide services to any students whose parents wanted them to participate. We had some, very few, but some continued comp ed services to make up for services that had been missed or reduced because of the pandemic. So last year was that summer program for kids with IEPs continued to not look so much as severe harmful regression kind of thing, but more if kids needed services, because we know that kids have had disrupted learning and there are learning gaps for sure. So overall, we had 206 kids participate. Last year was our first year of having an SEL budget and trying to do that prevention and early intervention in our district over the summer. In addition, I spoke to you guys a couple of years ago and last year as well, transition has been a huge theme for educators and parents in the community. So we continued what we had done during the pandemic, which was give all of our SEL support staff, so your what used to be behavior specialists who are now been renamed SEL interventionists, your school counselors, your homeschool liaisons, some of the special educators, and gen ed teachers had opportunities to receive pay for working and keeping relationships going, bringing kids into the school, having additional tours or opportunities to stay in contact, doing activities with them throughout the summer. So those were for kids who the building teams identified as at risk. In addition to that, Fern, we worked together and Fern did a great job with the team that was focused on SEL. So they provided services for the first time, some formal piloting of SEL programs. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So we added $3,280 to this line item. That was one of the questions, to add 2 potential staff members so that we could increase the number of slots for this program because it was very successful. We had a lot of people, the parents calling and saying, how do you get in? My kid's anxious too. This is perfect. And the word was spreading. Last summer, we had 32 students attend the programming for K-8, and another 34 students were seen by counselors as part of what Heather was talking about with the target transitional supports. And then we had integrated into all the programs more of that integrated kind of side-by-side coaching with the teacher. So it's just more a part of the programming that they received rather than sort of a specialized program. And we also had people pushing, somebody pushing into the Get Set program and 8.5. So it's really talking about in that way integration. We did do some surveys in our targeted, like our mindfulness and self-regulation programs, and got really good responses from parents as well as students. For instance, almost all the parents said that they would recommend the program to others, and students were had really positive things to say about it. So we did feel that kind of those two kind of models, the integration and the targeted supports for students who would have a hard time with the gap in learning. And this again is post-COVID kind of, and it doesn't really go away. We've seen just a really big increase in these kind of anxious and anxiety among students. So we're feeling like those were pretty successful.
I will say some feedback we got about ESY from some families was they wished it was longer. So it's like a 2-hour program, 2 to 4 times a week, depending on the students. And kids in the intensive needs programs do a 4-day program, for 5 hours a week, 5 hours a day. So we have looked a little bit at how could we increase that time and keep costs down. So that is something we're looking at, having listened to that feedback from families. So that's in line with feedback we heard about the ESY program.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So one of the things that you mentioned, Heather, is having, difficulty hiring some staff. How many staff members are we short right now, or?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about it from last year and compare it to this year. So as we came out of the 2021 school year into the 21-22 school year, we actually had last year at different times, there was as many as 5 open MTA special ed positions. We were able to fill most of them. A couple of them remained open all year. And what we ended up doing is really toggling together outside related service providers to do like reading support or very specific special education services. The good news for this school year is all of our MTA contracts are filled. So that's really great news. So that went really well. One of the other challenges we had is our, in the MESA group, the paraeducator group, we had last year, all of our schools had at least 2 to 3, up to 7, 8 paras missing from the staffing, which required us to look outside for behavior technicians and other social emotional support people to come in, or increasing the SEL type supports through homeschool liaison, additional people filling in to try to meet all the needs of the kids. Because as the kids came in, as we anticipated, some children hadn't been in schools, right? So you had kids coming in with lower levels of skills, behavior, social emotional well-being, as well as educators who were anticipating kids to come in like a typical 7th grader or a typical 4th grader or 2nd grader. And they weren't. So there was that dissonance in the schools. So what we ended up doing is pushing in more supports around that. So we ended up using some of the money that we couldn't hire paraeducators with to hire other supports to scaffold the buildings, because there were a couple buildings a couple times during last year that were in crisis. So for this year, the good news is, after we made the sidebar agreement with the MESA group around the level at which a person could come in being hired at for this year, we were able to, all of the lower elementary schools have all of their paraeducator positions are full. It starts at JMU's. There are a couple not filled. There are 5 not filled at the middle school, and I think 7 or so. I can get you the exact numbers and I can produce those for a different meeting. I actually was looking for them from Melissa, but we weren't able to connect today. What we did, what is an interesting trend in that is that the paraeducators, that those positions that aren't filled, are in our more intensive needs programs. So people, as they see open positions, are moving out of those positions. So people might be RBT trained, but they're moving into more of the mainstream special ed inclusion settings, leaving those open. So we have relied on hiring outside of district technicians to work in those positions, because those students really need a high level of scaffolding and support to be successful. We've been extremely successful during my tenure here of keeping kids in the district who historically would have been placed out. And some of that funding has supported other kids as well. So when you're bringing in more BCBA support, more ABAI support into those intensive needs program, and you're bringing in behavioral technicians that are being supervised through those agencies, you're getting a high level of fidelity in the implementation of the program. So if there's any silver lining, that's it. Of course, my personal preference would be to hire district personnel, train them ourselves. We have a lot of paraeducators who went through the RBT training to become behavioral technicians. The unfortunate part is there is that trend of moving out of those intensive need programs. So that is something we're looking at as well. So right now, there are openings for paraeducators at the upper, middle, and high school. Everywhere else we're set, and our professional staff is fully hired. So that's good news.
Great, great. So just a couple things. So reflecting on the summer services, thank you very much. I think that
Sure.
that was really good feedback. Some parents, they are sending kids to summer school for 6 or 7 weeks, and those kids might need a week off too. So looking
Yes.
at how you can do it differently is wonderful. I appreciate what you said, that you meet with our key administrators and our teachers, leaders, to identify what already exists, and then, put priorities on our knowledge, skills, and resources, because we're really trying to meet the needs of not just special ed kids, but all kids. So
100%.
I appreciate that last statement.
Yes.
All right. So I just wanted to clarify, because Lori and I asked the same question. 861010, that $13,000 increase, is that for the summer portion of SEL? Or so that is
So-
the second step curriculum support materials. I just
Yep.
curious as why there was such a big jump.
Yeah. So this is increasing by $13,000 due to anticipated expenditures on our K through 4 Tier 1 social emotional learning curriculum, as well as the consideration of the adoption of a comprehensive universal screening procedure that is consistent with the adoption of a multi-tiered system of support for behavior and social emotional wellness, the MTSSB system that we did 1 year of an exploration phase. We're now in year 2. That, of course, is an evidence-based system that's kind of helping us implement our system of care. And we've been working with the DOE, with a consultant on that this year. And so the second step program is currently being used by our K-5 students, was published in 2011. And since we adopted the program, it now has transitioned to a digital program, and we need to upgrade to this most recent version. And so those are the two pieces that we're looking at to kind of bring more cohesion, and also be able to look at evaluating what we're doing. So a screening tool would help us evaluate our second step, all of our universal programs, and be able to better identify and target universal interventions as well as targeted interventions in the SEL arena. And that kind of goes along with this theme of intervention and early intervention and prevention that we'd really like to move toward. And so that's why that has increased.
So just as a comment and something to think about, I absolutely 100% support SEL curriculum and instruction in the classroom. But here's my concern. CASEL in 2020 updated the second step curriculum, and I have the PowerPoint slides from their presentation from that, and it is specifically and overtly inclusive of critical race theory elements. I absolutely love our 2011 version of the curriculum, and I think it's great, but CASEL was very open, which is wonderful, but very open and specific to the additions to the 2020 second step curriculum. And that's part of their PowerPoint slideshow presentation. So I think given what happened last year and the nature of our community, we might want to maybe add additional things from our existing curriculum, maybe look at some other options. I know Frenzy is a politically neutral SEL program, very much like the 2011 Second Step program. And I just wanted to put that out there because I want our community to stay as unified as possible. And I don't want to blindside parents who may object to those portions of CASEL's additions to the program. So just something to think about as we move forward.
Was it a, can I ask you, was it a Castle presentation or Committee for Children? Castle, it's not published by Castle, is it Committee for Children,
Yes,
do you think?
yes.
Okay,
And I can email you those PowerPoint slides.
Yeah, I was not aware of that.
me neither. Yeah.
I only became aware of it because I'm actually doing professional development on SEL at our own school. And it was through researching a number of programs that I found that out. So it was a bit by pure accident that I discovered that. And like I said, I had already looked at our second step curriculum because, as we all know, some people hear a particular term like SEL and they make assumptions about what we're doing in Merrimack. And our second step program as it stands is wonderful. It meets all the goals of SEL.
It does.
And so that's where my research really began, was in answering people's concerns here in Merrimack specifically. And then as I started PD for our own school, looking for really good SEL curriculum. And honestly, that I just love what we do here in our district, and I love what our teachers do in the district. And keeping our district together and unified, I think, is just so important. So
Lori, can you send those to all of us,
I will.
please?
I would be
Yeah.
happy to. Absolutely.
That's,
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
I assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, the psychology testing service budget is going up because of the outside contract services increase.
So it's a combination. So we've had a number of, obviously, there's been a tremendous increase in referrals. And actually, I had prepared this great answer for a question Lori had asked. So I'm going to go back to it or maybe it might be you. So we've had a large number of referrals. We had 110 referrals this year alone. So as of January. So as of today, there have been 110 referrals. That's not counting the regular triennials that school psychologists need to complete as part of the special ed process. So that's an added component to that. Additionally, in that amount of money, we have increased, I added 900 hours because we have been incredibly fortunate to get the services of a neuropsychologist who initially offered me a couple hundred hours a couple years ago, and it came in incredibly helpful, especially when families are requesting outside neuropsych evaluations or wanting to get an independent evaluation. And you can say, you know, we have a neuropsychologist, because all of our services are contracted. So yes, we could go with that person, or here's a person we have, and we can expedite the process. Currently, the current waiting list is 12 to 24 months. So I have added, because this neuropsychologist has enjoyed working with us so much, that she offered up as much time as we wanted. So I was looking at adding 900 hours next year. I'm sure we'll use it, not just for when we have a really complex situation or student who really needs that deep dive into that piece, but also supporting families who would be looking outside for a neuropsych and being able to do it here with a much quicker turnaround and more support for the team. And you don't run into that conflict that often arises where parent, you know, I need to get an outside eval. That will not take the place of independent educational evaluations. If a family wants to do the one, they certainly can do that. So there is an additional school psych in there. The other component that's been really challenging, actually, for both last year and this year, we have not been able to, up until us coming back from the holiday break, we have not been fully staffed in school psychology since last fall, so a whole year ago. So we've been toggling together school psychology, working with outside agencies, relying on some remote evaluations at our high school level. We added in, I remember I shared this with you last year, we hired 2 academic evaluators who are special educators who have vast experience in evaluation. We have one at our high school right now to support the high school with their evaluations. And we have one at the JMU's MES complex to support that, because we weren't able to get enough across the district. That left, we had for this year that we are currently in, we had a school psychologist who was coming in to support RFS and TFS. That person resigned from the contracted service company the day before school started. So again, we were very reliant on, and they layered in what we could get. The great news is, because I was looking for an in-person school psychologist, we were able to get one in January. I interviewed. That person is working at Thornton's Ferry and Reed's Ferry, and things are going really well. So right now, for the first time since 2020-21, we have a full cadre of school psychologists to support both the testing and evaluation, our initial referrals, that consultation to teams, which is critical, and some individual school counseling where it's identified in an IEP.
And I absolutely support those services, but I'm thrilled to hear that you've got a neuropsych.
I love having a neuropsych.
That's
I have to
wonderful.
admit.
Absolutely. I just had a couple follow-up questions from Lori's that are not on our list. Just to clarify, again, this is to clear up misinformation. Would you, not all, but would you agree that the significant increase in student services, students that need services, is primarily because of the pandemic versus pre-2020 numbers?
So when I came, the district was somewhere around high 17, low 18%. We are not out of the range of other districts around us in the increase. I did mention in, I didn't say it aloud, but I will. We have a couple grade levels, like fourth grade, for example, which is interesting. First grade, they would have been in first, right? We're at 30%. 30% of that grade level is educationally identified with IEPs. Now, I can tell you that's a systems issue, right? Not all of those kids, but all of those kids have significant gaps specifically in reading. So working very closely with Amy this fall and winter, really looking at shoring up our universal level in reading instruction, really. We did handwriting with tiers, if you recall, last year in preschool and kindergarten, and purchased it with our early intervening services and special ed to reduce the over-reliance on OTs to deliver writing instruction. So doing that kind of work over time, and I've mentioned this here before, you're talking about a 2, 3, 4, 5-year process, will ultimately result in a reduction in special ed services. The average student who has an IEP is going to cost 3+ times the cost of a student who doesn't have an IEP, because you've increased, right, the high staff to student ratio, those supplemental aids and supports, that level of support, which is typically a human being, right, and all those kinds of things. So wherever we can shore up our universal program, it will ultimately reduce the costs down the road. So prevention and early intervention, as well as really looking at our core programs, and that's what's happening here. And building in that MTSS system is ultimately going to reduce the special ed costs.
And I appreciate Bill. He really advocated for you and for that when he presented the reading interventionist positions. And yes, it is a short-term expense for a long-term cost-saving measure. Absolutely.
100%.
Thank you.
Yep.
Can I just also add, Lord, that was part of the reason that we've asked for the additional fifth grade teachers at JMU's for next year. Because of that bubble in fourth grade, we know that a smaller class size for them will continue to give them the feedback that they need to fill in some of those gaps. So I know we've already done JMU's, but this connects to what we were talking about.
So that's very helpful because, you know, I've been looking at the numbers and there is a small increase of 30 kids, but now it explains why we need that. And I think that it's really important for the community to understand that this is critical times right now. And these students need to have this like yesterday. So thank you for that explanation.
Yes, it was.
Was it me?
Yes.
Sorry. Okay, so I think my question was around contracted SEL services. And I wanted to understand what the services that were contracted. Sorry. Contracted SEL services, $60,000 for contracted SEL services. What is it that's contracted? I just wanted to understand what that is versus like what's in district.
Well, what we're looking at there is the provision of more mental health prevention and early intervention supports at the high school in response to the different kinds of data sources that we have that just continue to show us that we need to support them at that level. So for instance, mental health support for highly at-risk students, support for students with substance abuse prevention supports that might be interfering with their education, supports for students in crisis, even like unique supports like Adventure Lore that offers like adventure-based counseling. So those kinds of creative ways that we're kind of bridging in supports for those kids at this time. So that's what we're looking at for that particular.
If you
That's what's-
noticed last year, that budget line was significantly higher. And that was because we were looking at a contracted service provider for SEL intervention or a series of them. You asked passionately, can we look at hiring in district? We did. So we worked with Matt this year and hired somebody under the MTA contract. That came in less than, so that's okay. So we don't need $104,000 in that line. But what we thought was there has been a constant request because kids are in distress in our high school in particular, and some in the middle school that are going to transition to the high school who need those sort of additional supports, and not all of them have IEPs. In addition to that, a theme, as you know, from my office is the alignment of the services in the district. So we've brought Ceresk in, Eric Mann from Ceresk, to work with our PASS program from the kindergarten through 12 level. Additionally, I have him working with Fern, with the SEL providers, so your homeschool liaisons, school counselors, the SEL interventionists, all of those folks, including Yes, to really align our supports and services, align some systems so that families and students, as they're moving through this system, their experience is similar. It may be developmentally different because it's appropriate, but they're all aligned. So we're going to capture some of that money in here as well to continue that work on the universal side. So that's another piece to this work.
Perfect. I just wanted to be able to speak to
Sure.
what that is. And I love that, I love that there's that highly specialized
Yep.
group of people that we can bring in to help with the
Yes.
kids that have needs, but they're so highly specialized. We don't have that person within our buildings or within our, so
Yep.
that's great.
100%.
Thank you.
And that provision of consultation to the teams. Yep.
I think it's me. A lot of these got answered already in in your responses to other people. So I'm going to take a minute to read them and kind of figure out
Sure.
what I still have questions
Sure.
about. So yeah, we talked about that. We talked about paras. Oh, I have this. I don't think we talked about this one. It was, my notes say specialized staff training, and I was curious why we
Sure.
spent so much in 21-22, and was that an anomaly?
It was an anomaly left over from the pandemic. So Crisis Prevention Institute, which is our nonviolent crisis intervention, CPI, many people's certificates lapsed. So the people that were trained in CPI, as well as all the unfortunate part was the train the trainer model, all of the trainers lapsed. So if you guys recall, last spring, we actually did a 2-hour training for all staff and all paras, and then all the folks who needed the 2-day training got that. The folks who needed the 2-day training plus the holds got that. And we flew in trainers to train the 60 people that were going to support the train the trainer model. So it was an anomaly so that we could move back to, because I did increase that budget line significantly 2 years ago, because it went from like $700-800 a person to almost, it's like $3,600 right now for a trainer. So right now that $13,000 works perfectly if you keep that system we had pre-pandemic of having that certain number go through the training every year. So you always keep in every building. There's 2 specialized trainers who do all the provision of training in those buildings. That model works because those administrators can work with them. They know what's best for their building, when they can hold those trainings. And additionally, Primex gives us 2, we get money back from them for 2 train the trainers. So we're going to go back to our system. I think $13,000 will be sufficient until they increase the cost again, which I anticipate they will.
Everything does.
Yep.
Yeah, we talked about that. So this is kind of I have a couple of questions because I'm new and I'm new to
Sure.
understanding how all of this goes together. for the tuition for placements for kids who we can't serve, I was curious because there was like a ton of them in 12th grade, and I was wondering if that's a placeholder for, because we provide services till 22.
Yes.
If that's a placeholder for anyone who's between 12th grade and
It
18 out of the system.
is. Yep. So that's the 18 to 22-year-old group, which that's a great question, actually, because the law did change and students. So for the first time, there are 5 students who would have graduated during this school year or at the end of this school year who will be here next year. So that money is already in our budget that we've planned for next year and accounted for. And moving forward, you'll see that those students will be staying till they're 22. So we anticipated that happening. That money is budgeted, but that will come. There'll be more children than that 18 to 22-year-old group. So whether they're in the out-of-district placements or here at our high school, and I will say we have 4 students who would have traditionally been placed in out-of-district placements in our high school. But because we were able to bring in supports here in the least restrictive environment in their home school, their parents wanted them in the high school, they have done incredibly well. Though I anticipate those services, unless something changed, they would continue till they're 22 with those supports here in our Get Set program. But that was a great question.
Thank you. Yeah, because I saw it and I was like, whoa, does that mean, we're going to have next year, we're not going to have all of these costs? And I was like,
No,
oh, no,
no.
probably not.
Gonna get them for longer.
Which is
It's
good.
okay.
We want to give
It's
them what they
okay.
need.
That's right.
And then my other question of there was something under tuition where it said costs submitted for special
Yes.
education aid, and I was wondering what that is.
Sure. So school districts submit their special education costs that exceed the state mandated threshold that's determined annually, which is determined by the state. They send out a memo telling us this is the financial assistance threshold. So you have to meet, it's typically 3.5 times the typical tuition. And once you meet that threshold, it's somewhere in the range of 59,000 to 62, 63. It moves up every year a little bit. The district gets a percentage back. It's intensive amount of work to do it. Like, so all of the billing for a student's transportation, every single day, their attendance is accounted for. Every single unit that they received of speech and language, OT, PT, everything has to be documented perfectly. And then it's submitted to the state in July, and then the state gives back a percentage of that money to each school district per pupil. So it's a financial assistance return on special education.
Can I elaborate a little bit?
Yeah,
Sure.
because of my follow up was how do we budget for that?
Oh, we budget for it by putting it as a estimated revenue on the revenue side.
Yeah.
So it's around maybe 500,000 a year. It has been high as close to 900,000, and it used to be called catastrophic
That's
aid.
right.
If any of you are familiar with that term from the past, but they changed it to special ed aid. But that's something that, Heather, her folk, everybody does meticulous paperwork to get from the state of New Hampshire, and it's taken in on a revenue side. One would think, well, why don't you just bounce it against the appropriation, make the appropriation? I can't do that because it has to be a gross budget. Right? I have to show my appropriations and my expenditures on one side and my revenues and everything like that on the other side.
Thank you.
Yep.
And thank you for doing all that work. to
Sure.
make sure we get that funding.
Sure, yeah. We've been targeting some in-district students too, because when you have a student who has an IEP and they have a one-on-one paraeducator, for example, and specialized transportation, you potentially could do it. Sometimes you're just meeting the threshold, so it's labor intensive. But there are students, all of the out-of-district students, for example, are going to meet that threshold. And again, the percentage comes
Yeah.
back.
And then when you're playing it out and actually getting down to reality as to what you're going to get, you can wind up in a situation where, per the calculation, you're going to get, let's say, 800,000. Then the state of New Hampshire decides to fund it only at like 70%
They
or
decide.
60%,
Right.
or less.
They decide.
So what do? Do you put down that you're going to get everything that they said? No, you're going to be a little bit conservative because you don't want a lack of revenue to put you in a deficit situation, because that's just kind of irresponsible. So we always try and estimate low on that one, as low as the DRA will let me go.
That's right.
It's true.
And my last newbie question was, what associations and organizations are we members of?
Sure. So the Council for Exceptional Children, right? So the New Hampshire Association of Special Ed Administrators, and I'm on the legislative committee in that group. All right. The Council for Administrators of Special Education, CASE, the New Hampshire School Administrators Association, and I'm on the HEAC committee, which is the Home Education Council, Advisory Council. ASCD, New Hampshire ASCD, and I'm sure all these guys are participates in that, and the Granite State Leadership Academy.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I didn't submit any questions because I had a really hard time coming up with questions as I was going through, because all of the increases made sense to me. I knew the pandemic would cause a lot of extra need for special services, and I work with these kids every day. I see it, so it made a lot of sense to me. So I guess I don't really have any questions, but just more clarifying for folks who may be listening to this. Again, these services aren't optional. These aren't things we can't decide not to do. They're required for us to do, and it's the right thing to do. I think everybody, I heard everybody in this room mention at some point, academic recovery has to be a priority. This is what that looks like. This is what academic recovery looks like. If that number of 30% in fourth grade who need services in reading doesn't immediately inspire you to say yes to this, then you haven't been paying attention. That's an alarming number, and that's something that we need to take care of. And I say that as a parent of a child in elementary school right now. Thankfully, his teacher's been incredible, and he's had a great year, and he's right where he should be at this point. But a lot of students need that extra help, and so thank you for explaining it the way you have. I was even trying to write questions down, and then you would immediately answer them. So that's a good thing. So thank
I
you.
get in a little trouble for talking too much, right, Matt?
I won't
Here,
admit to
not
saying
here.
Not here, okay.
I want to tack on to what Ken said too, is that academic recovery cannot help without the social emotional support. If kids can't self-regulate, if they have anxiety that it just goes untreated, they can't recover academically. So it's a whole student package. And I really want our community to understand that, because it is the morally right thing to do to help all of our students, but especially the most vulnerable students who are dealing with things that before the pandemic were never anticipated. And then our students who always have needed services. We can never forget their needs as well. And so academic recovery does not come without treating the whole child as a person and everything that they need to do that well. So I agree with you on the budget.
And then the only other, again, something to consider when we go to talk about this later on, or even voters, your crystal ball predicts that these services will not be as costly in the future. This is a solution for what we need right now. This is where our needs are at right now. And if we do this now, spend the money on this now, that will ultimately pay dividends down the road. So this is a big time fix for something that's hugely needed, but it's not it's not going to be that way forever.
I couldn't agree with you more, Ken. And truthfully, the work that's happening with the curriculum and assessment and instruction piece is crucial, as well as having on the general education side of this formula. Right now, really, if you look at it, it's very top heavy in special education, right? So most of the support is offered through special education. As you've heard some of it a couple weeks ago, you're going to hear more of it tonight. If we can really improve, right, and augment our universal level and our core program 100%, so what costs now today, what is that going to cost in 5 years if we don't mind it now? And I think those numbers are alarming, that 22% of our students in Merrimack School District are identified with educational disabilities right now, primarily in the area of specific learning disabilities. Reading is a huge area of concern. The second area happens to be other health impaired, and that is the category which is capturing your kids with executive skills deficit, social emotional deficits, again, executive skills deficits, and anxiety and depression. So couldn't agree with you more.
And just to kind of round out what everybody's already saying, and just to kind of bring it back to a point, this budget is reflective of what the stuff that we haven't been able to do in the tier 1 level, and some of the things that we've talked about tonight that we are doing, looking at the fact that fourth grade class has 30% of identified students with a learning challenge. Decreasing the class size is a gold standard approach to helping increase learning. Then you've got the addition of those reading interventionists. Yes, that's a cost now, but that will decrease costs later
will.
because we're targeting those tier one.
Yes.
And then when we get later into the district budget and we're talking about iReady, iReady is an assessment that you can see where kids are, but it has targeted interventions built
Yes.
in. So that those interventions, you know, we've used assessments before. I saw your question about how is STAR and iReady. I don't mean to answer that question prematurely, but that's what the difference is. STAR is like, hey, let's see where you are. You finish this assessment and then you wait till next year and you get another assessment. iReady is you assess, then they are on the computer doing targeted interventions, which they can do at school and at home. I see it in my district. It's so effective. And then there's another intervention mid-year, and then assessment mid-year, and then you're constantly assessing, and iReady then provides targeted individual level interventions for students. And these things are in our budget as new costs. And yes, it's pricey right now, but if we don't do these things now, we are going to pay far more later, kind of like when we didn't build the whatever, when the building costs have gone up and now it's, you know, exponentially more. We can't do that with special
Right.
services. We can't do that because of the cost, but we can't do it because we have to serve students well. We have to do the right thing by students. They need to get, we need to be able to, it impacts our graduation rate, right? These kids aren't going to be able to graduate if they struggle with reading, and it's compounded and compounded and compounded until they're seniors. So the pandemic has had multiple effects, and we're seeing it now, but I think we have a good plan, and we're doing so many right things to try to right the ship and give our students the support that they need. So thank you.
So you're minding that gap before it gets so big. Yep. Any other questions?
Well, I will let, if there's any more questions, or we'll let you close it out if you have anything last things you want to say.
Thank you for having us. It's a delight to visit with the school board and always the community of Merrimack. So thank you for having us.
Thank you for
We good?
coming. We
Yeah.
appreciate
All
it.
right. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I will invite our high school team. And we'll open the floor to you when you're ready.
Good evening, everybody. Good to see you all. I'm just going to read our brief budget statement to get things rolling here. In the Merrimack High School budget for the 2023-24 school year, you'll find an overall increase of less than 10% with many level funded items. Budget also reflects increases and decreases in some line items to categorize expenses into the correct usage lines. Significant items requested from the English Language Arts Department. There are increases in the replacement and new text lines in order to purchase books for advanced placement classes, as well as to purchase new text to align with the curriculum across all grades. The software line has a decrease due to not renewing one program. In the music department is asking for an increase in the replacement equipment line in order to begin replacing the drum line equipment as part of their 5-year plan. The drum line equipment is cobbled together from old equipment, much of which was donated by UNH over 20 years ago. PE and Health are requesting a replacement of weight room equipment for safety purposes. In the Science department, replacement of biology textbooks. The current books were published in 2008, and many have been lost while in remote and hybrid models of instruction. The software line in the Science department has decreased, excuse me, as many licenses have been purchased in recent years. World Language is looking to purchase the ACTFL, the Assessment of Performance Toward Proficiency in Language, software and testing. The scores would document students' progress towards benchmark levels and can be used to evaluate the alignment of curricular learning targets with student performance and state national standards. The program is approved by the state to determine student eligibility for the New Hampshire Seal of Biliteracy on diplomas. And finally, in the athletic department, purchase of new football away white jerseys. The current jerseys were purchased in 2016, and many of them are beyond cleaning. So that's our opening statement.
Thank you. So before we begin, I do want to take a moment to thank Stephen Rich for last week, the tragedy we had at the high school, and what a great job they did meeting the needs of all the students and being available. I heard nothing but really positive feedback, and that's where the heart is, right? Like right now we're talking about budgets, but that just seems just not even important when you think about what you did last week for our kids in our community. So we're very grateful. Now I'm a little choked up. Now I'm going to be.
Well, I'll let you collect yourself. But I just want to say, I also got a personal text from a teacher saying that they felt so supported. They felt like they had everything that they needed during that time. And, obviously your first thoughts are with Xander and his family. But our students and our teachers were in that building and you all were in that building, and you knew him. And to have a teacher say, they felt like they had all the support that they needed to get through such a difficult week, it means everything. So it truly is the most important thing.
And I'll add to that. I teach saxophone lessons out of my house, and I have a couple Merrimack students that I see. And that week I was asking them, and Merrimack High School students, I said, so how is it over there? What's the vibe? And they were like, yeah, it's okay. But all of them had just like this sense of community that I've never heard them mention before, ever. The wearing of the red and coming together and all that. They were proud to be from Merrimack High School that week. And that was a really cool thing to see. And so, yeah, really, really nice job. That wasn't an easy thing, I'm sure.
Okay. So I know that's a hard one.
All right, now answer money
Well,
question.
I guess it took everybody. We want to thank the SAU and the police department and the local police departments for sending a number of comfort dogs. They were the big hit, and obviously all the staff and students working together. It was a come together moment at a very difficult time, so we appreciate it.
Okay, so so my first few questions are really about using data analysis to look at our trends and try to look at our resources. My concern really is for not this year, but next year, we're facing that $2 million deficit coming from the Department of Education. So when we look at our positions, it's always better to lose positions to attrition versus cutting positions. So some of the things that we talked about in the past was the 4x4 block, and worked in a couple systems, and I know you talked about it last year during the budget, and people were, why are we talking about a 4x4 during a budget? But it is there is some cost savings. There are some pros and cons. So I just wanted to know where we're at. Are we still exploring it? Is it something that might happen in the future?
Well, in speaking with the building admin and department heads in the SAU, we absolutely remember, agreeing to take a look at our schedule and researching if it is the best schedule for our students. So we assembled a scheduling team, a committee with each department represented. The committee has been diligently working on that task since last summer. We worked on, developing a schedule that meets the following goals. One would be allow sufficient time for the development of a deep level understanding, maximizing teaching and learning time, provides time for possible homework assistance, attempts to reduce student anxiety, addresses the length of time for lunches. We do have some lunch times that are 3 times a week, very long. Also allows time for staff collaboration and allows students to meet graduation requirements. And like I said, this group has been meeting monthly, every other week maybe, since the summer. And they've recently met, and they've drafted up a schedule proposal that they will be submitting to the SAU review very soon. So that's kind of where we're at with that.
Thank you.
Sure.
I appreciate the update. And so my next one kind of follows the same as we, look forward to a change in schedule, and we look forward to class sizes. New Hampshire just recently was rated 6th in the nation for schools, which we've been as low as 3. But one of the things that they wrote in the research is because New Hampshire does concentrate on class size, and like we've said before, class size is important, and we're not putting 40 kids in a class. Last year, we talked about, if you remember that, sometimes the guidance director was making the decision on what class sizes were. So I'm wondering if there's been more of a collaboration, and how do we determine class size at the high school?
The department head has never been the sole person, as long as I've been there, to make those decisions. We do what we would call the pre-enrollment process with our students, and it's really student-driven. And so that we do simple tallies. The microphone's on? It's on.
Should be much brighter. There you go.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. What happens then is that the department head of that department and the pre-enrollment numbers, I meet with them as well as the entire guidance department. And we look at the pre-enrollment numbers to decide which classes are going to run based on student interest. Sometimes you have to make a decision. For example, if you have 100 students that want a certain class, do you decide to do 5 sections of 20 or 4 sections of 25? And some of those decisions are based on staff availability, for like certifications, as well as access to those classes. Some classes, there are caps, whether it's about safety or about requirements, state requirements for only having 24 in a science room, or only 16 in a foods class because of stoves, et cetera, in that sense. So after that meeting, the sections are decided, and that drives the number of students per class size. Does that give you a rough idea of where we come?
Okay. So then, do we have any classes that are running over 30 students in a class?
We are only at one class that I'm aware of at 30. Okay.
That's a good answer.
Yeah.
Okay, now, the next question moves on to 504 coordinator position. How many students have 504s? Do we work at the middle school to align the transition from the middle school 504 to the high school 504? And then who oversees and writes and make sure we're in compliance with 504s? And then I know Jenna had a question too on 504, so maybe she could jump in.
I can answer that question if that's all right,
Yeah,
Steve,
sure.
and you can jump in. So we also noticed the anomaly of the 504 coordinator being in Steve's budget. It was one of those moments that we've now spent some time sort of working on. HR director Melissa Faslick and Bill, myself, Matt, we spent a lot of time looking or figuring out how that happened. We are working to put that person where they should be in the budget. You won't see that moving forward. There are about 200 students that have 504 plans at the high school, and I can probably look to Steve and Rich. That number is likely to increase by the end of the week. I do feel like there are lots of students that are reaching out for those types of accommodations during the school day, whether it's for anxiety, depression, executive functioning. They're not able to come to school for lots of different reasons. And by law, as you know, we're required to provide those accommodations. So Christina Connor is our 504 coordinator. She does a fantastic job. She really focuses on transition with the middle school. I talked to her a little bit about that process. She goes to the middle school. She works closely with the 2 school counselors there to ensure that she understands the scope of the student need. As those of you that are educators, the 504s, it's dictated by the environment, right? So Christina lets them know, what does it look like here? How can you anticipate the need? What needs did they have at the middle school? And how can those transition to the high school? We do have folks at each building that are required to be 504 coordinators, writing the plans, working with families, getting the right documentation. Christina is that point person at the high school. And then Fern Seiden, our director of student wellness, she really coordinates the overall training for 504s for the district. And she is a licensed school counselor, as is Steve. But those are the folks that oversee that.
So are they the contracted service provider? Am I confused? Am I missing something?
Yeah, I mean,
Or is that what you're trying to figure out as well?
Yeah, that's a model that was developed and implemented by the former central office administration a couple of years ago. We will be changing that.
Okay.
We want a person that is in the employment of the Merrimack School District. We're going to look at that with Steve and Rich and Jill as part of the guidance function.
Yes.
And we think there can be some analysis of job responsibilities in the guidance department, not only with the counselors' roles, the numbers of counselors, although we have not come up with any preconceived idea. We want to talk this through, looking at the ratios of the counselors, but also incorporate 504s as part of that function, but also the sort of the triage mental health component that we implemented this year that we're going to refine for next year also. So
I didn't want to write when I wrote that question, like, this doesn't make sense to me. But it didn't make sense to me, and I feel safe to say that now. And what you just said makes perfect sense to me and sounds like a much more holistic and cohesive plan, and I'm very excited to see what changes that'll bring. So awesome.
well, it will involve a lot of conversation with Steve and Rich and Jill and the current director of guidance.
Awesome.
Deborah.
Thank you.
So some of my questions are very similar to last year. Last year we talked about the CT programs and the number of students that go to Nashua North, Nashua South, or Elvern. So my question would be, how many students are taking advantage of the career and technical programs? How do we advertise these programs, which I didn't ask in my questions, do we let all students know that these programs are available so they have those opportunities?
Just numbers wise, currently we have 10 students attending Nashua High School North, 16 Nashua High School South, and 31 at Elvern. We typically do tours in the spring. We bus kids down, offer tours to each facility. Students must apply, and all decisions on admission are made by the receiving schools. And checking with Deb Barker, our guidance director, school counselors promote the CTE programs in their private conversations with all their students. I believe we have a luncheon this week. 4 or 5 staff members are going to Elvern for a luncheon, and I want to say that in early March we're planning a bus trip. So they're promoted very regularly.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question about that? Just as a parent at the high school, I try to pay attention. I try really hard. I have a lot of kids, so like I'm doing the best I can. But I must miss it because I'm not seeing it. Does it go out just to students or to parents? Because bless my children's hearts, it never reaches me somehow. So I don't know. I'm just going to speak for myself, but also I think a few other parents, the weekly PTG email
Yep.
that literally comes to my email, it goes to my text. It's like, hey, don't miss me. That is an awesome way to make sure parents know about that so they can encourage their kids. If anybody else has a child who, where I might say, hey, you should check that out. And they say, sure thing. And then they don't. And they specifically don't let me know. I'm not saying that's ever happened to me, but maybe it has. And so it would be helpful if parents got that as well. I'm not saying they don't. I'm just saying it would be good that it goes out to parents as well, just because sometimes parents know this might be a really great opportunity for my child, or I didn't even know that existed and it would be a good opportunity but the child is like, whatever, I'm at lunch and I'm not even paying attention. So just a thought.
Well, we appreciate that suggestion. We'll make sure it gets out to you.
Yeah, that I know parents read. Can't really miss it.
May I say our new position of, Director of Alternative Pathways to Graduation and ELOs, we're hoping that that individual will expand the technical skills availability to our students. About 5 years ago, the Massachusetts Business Alliance for Education did a survey of a large number of businesses in a variety of industries. 65% of the respondents said they needed students with a greater level of proficiency in the technical and vocational skills. The problem is there aren't enough openings and to serve students in need. And so we're hoping that through job placement experiences, ELOs, that we can fill that gap with a number of additional students.
So, that's good because I have another question now. So, so in the Nashua programs and the Elvin programs, are there just so many seats for Merrimack kids? So they say like you get 2 seats or you get 4 seats. It's not like an equal playing field that
Correct.
their kids get first and then we get second.
Mhm.
Okay. That's interesting because it's a statewide program and yet our kids don't have the same, ability
Most
to access.
most CT
All right.
class sizes are
Interesting.
capped due to safety purposes and workstations. So we only have a specific amount of kids that can go, students that can go.
I said last year also, the state began an initiative where member districts were to make every effort to align their calendars with the CTE centers. And we had several very good meetings, and many of us are quite aligned with us, so students are not missing opportunities and maximizing as much time on those technical skills as possible.
Just a follow-up question on the conversation. Do we have a higher demand than availability here in our district? Do we have students asking that can't get in?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that a significant number?
I don't believe it's significant. I do believe that Alvern could take more. I met with the Alvern director last year, and I want to say I vaguely remember a number of 40. So I
Okay.
think there are spaces. There were some kids that were denied
Okay.
for behavioral reasons. But yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so my next question is just trying to understand the budget. So there's a separate line item for co-curricular supplies. So my question would be like, who's responsible? So like, does like student council get like, you get $100 in supplies, or they just know that line item, like the first team? I was just trying to understand.
Well, Jill Hanlon, she wishes she could be here. She has a family issue going on. She's now overseas and inherited the co-curricular. So she is working with the SAU to kind of sift through it all and take a closer look at how the money is spent. Right now, co-curricular club advisors are asked about their needs. She sits down with each of them and asks what they need. And, all we could say is all requests that were asked of were met last year financially. So there isn't specific amount of money for each club. That's kind of one general fund. But we do know that whatever was asked was able to be funded last year.
Okay. Okay, so the next, it comes down to athletics. And so I'm just curious, always like when we are looking at equity in sports, when we write our budgets, why one sport might be paid more than another sport that are similar, or, the difference between, like maybe baseball and softball or lacrosse and soccer.
Okay. Well, I can talk to the baseball and softball. Baseball receives, a little bit over $2,000 more than softball. And one of the main reasons is they have to wear caps. If you go to softball games in the state of New Hampshire, it's very rare that girls wear caps. They don't have to per the NHIAA. Baseball does. So that's an additional cost. And for the last several years, we have had enough interest to field 3 baseball teams, but only 1 or 2 softball teams. So there's the difference right there.
So is it because we don't have enough girls to run a freshman
Correct.
softball team?
Correct.
So everybody who tries out for softball makes the team, makes a team.
I would think so. I would have to double check with Mr. Susi on that.
Right, because then, if they didn't, then you would have the third team.
Well, not if you didn't have enough.
Yeah, right. At least
Yeah.
since I've started
Yeah.
the last 2 years, there's only been enough girls interest to fields, JV, and varsity. So
Okay.
there's an extra paid coach for baseball, and then the caps are obviously a big expense. And it's is that okay? Can I move on to soccer and lacrosse?
Yeah, so with the caps, the boys' team have to have that because
Per
of the
NHIAA,
NHIAA, but the girls don't have to have them because of the NHIAA.
Correct.
And we don't want them back after they've worn them all year.
Yeah, so we have to reorder them every year.
Okay.
Beyond
That's not
washable,
right.
like the jerseys.
So my next question is about field space, and so again, I know that I asked a question last year about, do any of our teams have to fundraise to have field space in preseason or at any time? And the answer was no, but I know that the lacrosse teams do have to fundraise to have field space. So I was just curious why some teams would get field space and have it paid for, or, get an ice rink paid for, and then some teams might have to fundraise.
Well, in speaking with Mike, that fundraising for lacrosse did not come up. I can tell you what he shared with me. He said that all teams are treated equally. The actual equipment budget for soccer is $1,200. The reason why this is higher than lacrosse is because soccer balls are more expensive than lacrosse balls and need to be replaced more frequently. Also, there are years in lacrosse where we use fewer balls and therefore order less the following year. As far as space rentals, in discussions with him, he said that we rent space for practice only for those teams that cannot practice on site or use a town facility. Bowling, swim, alpine ski, ice hockey, indoor track need facility rentals because they are not available through the school district or town. We do have to rent space at Back River Sports Complex for soccer. This rental is for games only. We play all home games at the facility during the month of August and September to preserve the field at MHS. And then once October 1st hits, all home soccer games, varsity and JV, are played at MHS. None of the rental costs for use at the Back River Complex are for practice. We have to rent field place for soccer, not lacrosse. So I guess I'll have to check on with Mike on that lacrosse rental.
I actually think I might have the answer to that question.
Oh,
Just
great.
going back to my turf days, and I could be wrong, and somebody can double check this on me. But I think that what it is in the spring, lacrosse needs to practice sometimes before the fields get released, like because of snow melting and whatever. And so they choose to rent space at the Hampshire Dome, right? Because they are, instead of waiting, which could literally mean they don't practice until games start, right? They can't. Soccer doesn't have that challenge, right? Generally, the fields are open in August.
Yeah,
or whatever.
especially in the the fields in the Master Cola complex, under the turf and everything like that. It's all sand, so they drain quickly. But if we have a really heavy winter, it takes forever for those things to dry out. And everybody's seen those signs on the way if you're driving down O'Gara in front of Babusick Lake Road that said "Fields closed per maintenance" in red letters. So that can add to it.
And I think the Lacrosse Booster Club has said the solution to that is let's raise money to rent some time
to
at
the
the
dome,
Hampshire
yeah.
Dome so that we aren't dependent on that. However, that's their choice because our fields get released when they get released.
But I would argue that practice before the first game is necessary,
Absolutely.
not and to me, I mean, of course I have no skin in which team plays what, but it seems to me that if the requirement for funding for outside things is that the fields are not available, it seems like October for soccer is just as unavailable as spring is for lacrosse.
Well,
That's just my point.
Yeah.
Like I
good
see
point.
these kids fundraising and they have to raise like $3,000 to be able to afford fields right away. That's how they start their season. And just personally, as a parent of someone who played lacrosse and now, I have a child that actually coaches lacrosse, it just bothers me that we would have to have our kids do that. Like, it just seems like with a budget, we should be giving them, if that's what they need, then I have a hard time saying, well, it's their choice, because preseason is as important because of injury.
Sure.
And if you don't preseason, then you can be plagued with injury. That's just 25 years of being a varsity coach.
Yeah, and let me say, like, their choice, right? What I mean is, it was their solution to the problem they
It
had.
was their solution, right? It was their
And
solution.
I'm glad you brought that up, Jenna, because going back to my coaching days in Milford, when I coached varsity baseball, we had to fundraise by selling those tickets to the community so we could pay for the dome use. But with that said, we could sit down with Mike and take a look at that closer.
Right. And going back to, funding programs and just being completely transparent. I think that, so I really liked when Bill became the superintendent, because he went to teachers and department heads and he said, what do you need to be fully funded? And when I was actually a coach here, Joe Raycraft, that's exactly what he did. He would say to us, what do you need? And then we would write our own budget, and then he would maybe cut it, but the budget wasn't the same. It was based on needs of our season. It wasn't the same every year. And yes, soccer balls cost a little bit more than lacrosse balls, but guess what? $3,000 versus $750 year after year after year. That's a lot of soccer balls, right? Like, so to come to equity, I think that the budget needs to flow based on need. What is the athletic needs of this program this year? And sometimes it might be, I need this year, but the next year I don't need it. And I think and then he would give us our list, like, here, you got $1,200. We were responsible to do our own ordering and our own inventory. And then we knew exactly what we had every single year. It was a great system. And I'm just throwing it out there because I really thought it worked and it was really fair.
I think, just in reading further on, I think the problem we have with indoor track is if we don't pay for them to use a facility, they really can't practice indoor track. Lacrosse and baseball can practice their spring sports in the gymnasium preseason.
Oh, that's true. You're right.
Yeah, I mean, I remember breaking many windows.
That's
with
that,
baseball, so.
that's why the indoor track in the winter is more expensive, because they also have to rent the dome. But you're right.
Yes.
And I think you're right. Lacrosse rents the dome because they prefer not to practice solely in the gym.
Right.
So we do provide a space for them to practice. I'm not saying
not the
what's
best.
need or what's not.
I don't think you should, I think you would need to resource how much time they get in the gym compared to, because I don't think it's what you think. I don't think it's equitable.
I could check on that.
And I'm not saying it is. I'm
No.
just saying they do have. I do now. You're reminding me that is something they said that they want to practice on a turf. Who can blame them? I understand that.
Right.
100%.
Right. And then it also comes down to a safety concern, because those balls are very hard in a gym, and you have 40 kids in a gym for an hour. It's not like, softball, you can actually do a lot of training in a gym, but there's sports like lacrosse with those hard balls. I think it's very difficult. So you have to worry about safety all the time. That's all okay.
Thank you.
The next one is new textbooks. So I think all of our textbooks now, most of them are online, but we're ordering some textbooks that are online and some textbooks in person. And I'm just wondering, how do we determine as a district textbooks what we're going to order? And what is the rotation?
There is no set plan that it's this content area this year and next content area the next year and so on. What we do is based on some of the things that you noted in terms of availability, replacing text if they have the edition that we would like. For example, with the biology book that we are requesting, it's 11 years old. We try to have a online component extended for another 6 years. They would not do that for us. So their online support doesn't meet the edition that we currently have. In addition, we only have 243 textbooks, and we will have a sophomore class of over 280. So we need new textbooks, and we can't replace the ones that are currently exist. We lost several during the COVID years and then some of the hybrid years as well. So that's why we're proposed, but we're not proposing 280. We only want 200, all of which come with an online component. And then we ask for an additional 100 subscriptions so that every student can have an online subscription, and that the 200 books stay in the building, less likely to lose them because they become class sets. And that's that's sort of the model we've used for textbooks over the last several years. And you're right, every new textbook that we do purchase, we want the publisher to have an online component. And we are currently working with Mrs. Doyle about curriculum as we roll out curriculum review and revision for the core content areas over the next several years. That will be part of every discussion with each one of those departments in terms of, do we have sufficient resources to provide the right curriculum basis with our textbooks, among other resources.
And I would just add that the department chair for science, Adam French, he really did his homework related to this book. And Savvis is a company that we work with. They also publish Envisions, and they're the company that we're going to be pivoting to provide the biology textbook. The 6-year subscription also includes a teacher platform that is very robust. And as Rich noted, the text they were using was from 2008, and it was not aligned with the Next Gen Science standards. So I know that the next conversation that the science department was going to have was around physical science books. So, look for that in the next budget. So
He asked this year. We thought we'd be a little
about
prudent.
80 grand would put you
We
over
had
the
chemistry last year, so.
And I just have one more comment on textbooks. So I don't know if this is possible, something we could look into, but I know there's, in the past, a lot of school districts would mail their older textbooks or uniforms to countries that really needed, that support. And I just didn't know if it's something we could look into, find out, it might be the shipping costs are so high, but there are places that, would appreciate, 100 11-year-old textbooks, even though it's like for us, I mean, for them, it's still learning. So I just thought popped in my head.
Yeah, I can certainly ask our rep, Tippy Johnson is actually from Merrimack. I think some of you know her, and she's been really great. And I can ask if there is a way to use the media rate to send
Right.
that to a school.
That
that's
would
in
be
need.
great.
I can
That
follow
would
up
just-
with her and ask.
Feel good. Okay, that's it. Lori, you're up.
I'm going to jump to my textbook questions since we're on textbooks. Since these fall in line with the English department, we have a 35-25 budget, which is 7-fold higher for adopted novels for English 9 classes, as well as AP Honors class text. But then we're also over here asking to purchase Actively Learn, which says unlimited text and almost all the text for all the grades. So I'm curious as to why we're buying so many hard copies over here when we have a tool that has unlimited texts.
Well, currently this budget year, we have $33,000 in the Actively Learn software account. They decided that it wasn't meeting their needs. Some of the novels that they would like to use in the curriculum could not be accessed through that support. They decided to reduce that from 33 down to 19,000. And out of that $14,000 savings, they decided to target 6,000 towards either replacing some of our current novels that we've lost again through COVID, or some new ones to support some contemporary novels that they would like to expand in their curriculum.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you. When you have the descriptions below each line item like that, they don't always align back to each other. So that's a perfect explanation. Also, last week we had the middle school here, and they were talking about their uniform replacement schedule. We got a nice detailed explanation on that. And I'm not arguing on whether the football jerseys need to be replaced or not. I'm just asking, do we have a systematized uniform replacement rotation policy?
We do. Uniforms are typically replaced every 3 to 5 years. And every uniform for every sport has been replaced since 2017 and 18. We're going to begin again in the 2023-24 school year to replace uniforms. Football uniforms are the only ones that are budgeted to be paid for. The rest, all of the uniforms are paid for by gate fees for events.
All right. I noticed that we had budgets for science field trip, of course, not during COVID, but that it's significantly higher this year. So I'm curious as to what drove the difference.
Well, actually, our science budget is level funded for field trips. I think it's 7,000. I don't know. I would hate to say that, but without looking.
Yeah, and I didn't write the line number down.
I literally just made a notation that next year we have to have page numbers
Yes.
next
Yeah.
to this, because when we go back
I
and look,
apologize.
so it's like these little things that as I'm going through it, I have to write down and send to Sandy, because when we have the line number, we should also include the page number, because,
Yeah.
Especially if I wrote it down wrong.
okay, good.
Oh, maybe it was social studies. Sorry, social.
Oh.
No, well,
There is a-
yeah, social
yes.
studies,
Yeah.
not science. I apologize for
Okay,
that.
so the social studies is definitely not level funded. Last year, the field trip was targeted for our U.S. history class, which is what a required class for graduation, and it was offered to all the students that went. It took about 7 buses to do so, but there was only about 1,500 in the budget. It ended up being a $3,000 expenditure that we found funds in other ways to provide all the students a trip without having to pay for the transportation part of it on their end. Next year, students from all high schools in New Hampshire will have to pass the civics exam. So we have approximately 280 sophomores targeted for next year that will participate, not only have to take the civics class and they pass the civics exam, but we plan to support that curriculum through trips to the Kennedy Museum and the Freedom Trail.
So additional field trips.
Correct.
Yes, more students.
Oh, that's
like-
great.
Yeah.
So maybe in the future, just as we put the booklet together, if we've had to adjust from another line item, maybe we could note that so that it didn't look like we didn't have an over expenditure in that department, because that's what it looks like here. And because I know we have to do that, I know we have to move things around. So maybe if we note that in the like that little paragraph, so that while it was technically not over expended, we adjusted just so that the school board can see that there was a shortfall.
Yeah, okay.
All right, and that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. I think it's my turn. I think I asked this last year, or so I already talked about my 504 question. Okay, I know I asked this question last year, but I still, forgive me, don't remember the answer. Why are scoreboard and announcers paid? Why aren't they not volunteer roles? Like, again, my personal experience extends only to soccer, and if we have an announcer, great. If we don't, there's no announcer. I know that's not how it is for football, but how does that work?
Well, we budget scoreboard and scores for every team. Soccer, for instance, is budgeted for a scorer, but it wasn't filled this past year, so Mr. Susi does a lot of wind up doing it. We really don't feel comfortable asking parents to work during a game. We really want them to be able to come and watch the game and enjoy their children's performance. We also don't want, and trust me, I know this because I was the what is it, for the football game there. The MC for the Powder Puff football game.
Yes. Yeah, trying to
So
run
when
the
I was up
scoreboard.
in the stands trying to work the scoreboard, it's impossible. So we don't want to look for volunteers to do that because there is a lot more to school boards now than when we were young. So we don't want to ask volunteers to do that. Not everyone knows the rules of clock stoppage. And Mr. Susi did say that he's not aware of any high school that does not pay their score bench. Police attend. Did you ask about police? Is that
Yeah,
next
but
question?
I'm not gonna lie. My high schooler answered that question after her attendance at a recent basketball game, and she came home and explained to me why that was necessary.
Yes. So police
Thank
attend
you,
football and
Chloe
basketball
Hardy.
games for public safety. There are fewer football games. We have 4 officers at each home game for football and 2 for basketball. I will say that I was at the Portsmouth game on Friday, and things were much better. And a couple parents came up to me and really, really appreciated our student section for their, you know, just enthusiasm and cheering on their team. So we're going in the right direction with that.
Oh, okay. So my next question is not as much, is a little bit of a question. So you can see my long-winded thing here. I would like to preface my comments for the community with the fact that I'm very proud that we have a robust sports program for our students, that it is well-funded. We still have some equity issues that we might need to address, some things that we need to address, but I'm, as a sports parent, 3 high school students so far, 3 high school athletes so far, I am all for sports. That's prefacing what I'm about to say. So I have a few questions here in regards to equity when it comes to extracurricular activities. On page 17, oh, look at me, I put page number in there, myself, which is, thank you to myself for that. It says that the co-curriculars, which are non-sport extracurricular activities at the high school, receive $16,000. I'm glad to hear you say that, you know, they were gone too. You asked, what do you need? And they got what they needed. That's fantastic. I'm trying to understand how that's broken up between all the various non-sport clubs or co-curriculars that run at Merrimack High School. Like, what does that look like?
That's a loaded question because we're trying to figure that out too. Jill's kind of inherited that this year and again has been working with Bill around trying to organize that.
Yeah, and I know that's a little bit because she's having a personal thing where she's not here, so we don't have that all sorted out. So I'm okay with that, to let that sort of lie and figure out. Here's what I want to say when we're talking about equity and we're talking about kids and we're talking about equity between sports. I'd like to talk about equity between co-curricular activities of sports, of which sports is one. Right? We have kids that are in robotics. We have kids that are in theater. We have kids that are in National Honor Society. We have kids that are in SAD or whatever. All these different
Student council.
Student council. I can't even. There's a long list. I probably don't even know. I know a handful of them off the top of my head. But I've noticed a budget inequity between funding for sports versus the arts or other co-curricular activities that I would like to understand. And I'm using this budget cycle to highlight some of that. I'm going to say the same thing to you both that I said to Mr. Carragher. This is not a you guys thing. This is as a community, I think we need to have a conversation around equity and community values that helps us to look at our budget and do what's right for kids of all interests, not just sports. Sports are awesome if you're a sporty kid. If you're not a sporty kid, sports are maybe not awesome. So what I want to say is our sports budget minus transportation. I took transportation out because there is a line for transportation provided for co-curricular. So for co-curricular transportation in the budget is $75,000. I think for sports total, it was $96,000 and change, both cases. So our sports budget at Merrimack High School minus transportation is $221,034. In comparison, our music program, which is arguably the best in the state, receives $20,523. So $221,034, okay, versus our music program, which is $20,000. But band is a class. It's not a co-curricular, right? So band is a credited class.
It lives in both worlds. It's
It
very
does.
gray.
Yes, but
No, I'm not
my
arguing.
kid
I'm just
can't
saying,
miss marching band because he loses actual class credit for not going to marching band. So it's not like that same student who does swim doesn't lose class credit when he misses swim practice. But if he misses marching band, his grade goes down. So yes and no.
and I would agree that should be looked at because there is a difference between a class and a co-curricular. And I would say that Shannon experienced that where a son wanted to run track and wasn't able to make a football game and was penalized. And I don't believe a student should be penalized for participating in multiple different activities. I think band is the class and the marching band is a co-curricular. That's just my
Oh,
own personal.
boy. You just lit Ken on fire.
And I'm just saying that there's,
All right.
Go ahead. Well, I would argue that's not the case. Just like if you're taking a science class, you have units that break the science class up, whereas marching band is a 6 to 8 week unit of the band class. Not to mention you learn additional skills in that. I could talk about this all night and I won't, but I would say that that is very much a part of the class. I agree that that's a problem. Students should not be penalized for one thing for participating in another. I think we need to look at making it more equitable in terms of scheduling, so that way kids don't have to make those kinds of choices. So I would absolutely agree with that. But I do very much, and I think anybody who's ever been a part of a program like that would agree, marching band is very much a critical component to the band class.
not arguing that. I was
Yeah.
more worried about the penalties for students.
That is a problem.
Well, I would like to speak on behalf of all band parents to say that that is absolutely happening. I know of a student who had a theater performance in which she had a lead role. She had to miss a marching band performance and her grade went down as a result. So, yeah.
And those
But I would
performances,
Totally off topic.
and those performances are our summative assessments.
Yes.
That's how
Yes.
we assess kids. Is
And-
in a math class, you take a math test. Those are
Yes.
our tests.
And I had the same
100%.
thing. I had a student who's, we had our concert on the schedule when the calendar went out 6 months, and the place where he did his recitals scheduled their recital the night of the choir performance and the concert, and that concert's a grade. It's part of it. It's part of the whole thing you're working towards and the assessment. So
I will say for last thing I'll say, sorry, totally off subject. With my students, if I have a student who needs to miss a performance, we have so many makeup opportunities to make that performance up. So I don't know the program necessarily at the high school, but I know that that's a very common practice, is having some kind of makeup so that you're not losing grades or dropping your grade for that reason.
Well, no comment on that. Okay.
Jenna, can I
So-
just ask a clarifying question? When you said 0 for robotics,
No, I did. I don't. Did I say that? I haven't said that yet. I haven't said
thought
that
you
yet.
heard-
You're
you
reading
mentioned
ahead. I'm just kidding.
I thought
I haven't
thought
said
you
that out
it
loud
earlier,
yet.
but robotics falls under first in the
Okay.
budget, so there's like 19 or 20,000 budget under first. That's robotics.
Okay, great. Well, when I get there, I will adjust my comments accordingly. Because that's actually a very good point. Okay, so back to $221,000 and change for sports, band $20,000. Band is a class, not a co-curricular. Another conversation we can have for another time. But all other co-curriculars together combined, I guess with the exception of robotics first, is $16,000. So even with robotics, if we added 20, let's say for robotics, that's $36,000. So there's lots of money in the budget for new sports uniforms and equipment, which is $32,000, almost $33,000, for new helmets and shoulder pads for various sports, or $12,000 for replacement of away football jerseys purchased in 2016. But now I said $0 for theater or robotics as an example, but you're right, first is in there. So, but nothing for theater that I'm seeing. Am I not seeing that?
There is some for theater.
In the comments under co-curricular supplies,
Yeah.
it says performing art productions and the school play.
Okay, right. So in that $16,000 budget. So out of that $16,000 is whatever they need for the school play, but also split between every other co-curricular that exists. So how much does the theater program actually get out of that? Question mark. When Jill comes back, right? Here's what I'm trying to say. I mean, and again, like in the budget, just to rent a hockey rink is $25,000. Again, I'm super proud of the fact that we can is field the right word for hockey? Field a hockey team? I guess it's not a field, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like that we have a hockey team. Our hockey team's awesome, and I'm in support of that. We have to rent a rink because we don't have a rink and we're not building a rink. So I understand that. I'm not arguing that these things should be cut or that they are not necessary. However, taking theater as an example, last year our high school musical performed without microphones because I don't know if we don't have any. Exactly, I think we don't have any, but even if there was money to rent them, in talking to the director from last year, technology in the Little Theater is too outdated to accommodate them. And I got some specifics from him, and I talked to Mr. Hanlon.
I actually have some information regarding that. I have, and someone had asked this, I have we have a school improvement fund, and that we use during right around our NEASC visits. But when we don't have a NEASC visit and we don't need to use that fund, I talked to the SAU this year, specifically Matt, and asked if we could use that money for new AV equipment in the little theater. So that is being purchased. We also purchased a new screen in the little theater because it's literally has duct tape taping it together. So all of that stuff was purchased with school improvement funding this year.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it was over $10,000 worth of
Yeah,
equipment.
when Tom Tussaud was here,
Yeah,
from
you guys mentioned that,
facilities,
yeah.
he kind of said the same thing, and we were kind of holding off as far as the source of the funds to take care of it. But it's from Steve's school improvement fund. Which one we're not using for that is to do a response to any NEASC accreditation issues too, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I'm thrilled to hear that. I'm beyond glad to hear that. I'm also glad to hear that, you know, whoever came, well, actually, you said this about when you were, Lori, when you were in there. But I'm hoping that these co-curricular sponsors or directors or whoever they are, when they come to you and say, this is what we need, that what they need goes into the budget as much as it would be for sports. I understand that part of the reason that sports is funded so robustly is because we have an athletic director. It's his job to make sure they have what they need, right? And we don't have a co-curricular director or a theater director in the same way that can make sure that all of these things are taken care of. I understand that, but I just want to make sure that we are doing ongoing updating to the little theater or to some way, because as a parent looking at it, again, my child has not been involved in theater at the high school, just as a viewer, but was involved at the middle school. And we had so many kids involved at the middle school that went on to the high school. And I don't think many or any of them are actually participating at the high school, because we have an awesome theater program at the middle school and it like drops off at the high school. I'm not sure if it's an inconsistency with directors. I don't have enough familiarity with the program to know why. I just want to make sure that we're funding it appropriately so that it can exist at the high school, because all of those kids that were in that production in 8th grade happen to have moved over to this paid community theater where I'm involved. And we have the talent in our district to have an incredible program every year and at the high school, and it's not existing, and I want to make sure it's not because of funding. I'm focusing on theater, but like any co-curriculars, you know, with $221,000 in the budget for all for sports and all co-curriculars at $16,000, the disparity there is so large. I want to make sure that those other co-curriculars are getting what they need, and they're not just asking for what they think they can get, right? And again, I think this is not a, hey, you guys are not living up to your end of the bargain, as much as it is, we have to commit as a community to provide for students that have all sorts of varied interests, from the performing arts to sports, to robotics, to whatever it is. And I want to make sure they all have what they need, in the same way that the hockey team has a rink for $25,000. I don't want to look at the theater kids and be like, sorry, we can't give you $5,000 for the lighting you need. You know what I mean?
I just have,
Yeah, please.
so I have a question off of what Jenna said. So for co-curriculars, usually there's an administrator, like I know in the past where this administrator's in charge of this, and so is there an administrator who's in charge of co-curricular as
Yes.
part of their
Jill
job?
Hamlin.
That's Jill.
Yeah.
And I was going to kind of piggyback on something Lori said about Bill going to people and asking what they need. Jill's going to do a better job, I think, of going already to asking the advisors of all these clubs and co-curriculars, what do you need? And let them know that you may have not asked in the past, but it's okay to ask now. And I think that hasn't been asked as frequently in the recent past as we should have. So I'd agree with you that we'll do a better job of letting them know. We can
Tell us
support
what you
you,
need.
you just have to tell us what you need. Everything they've asked for supplies has been met, but they may not know that there's other things they can ask for as well. So
And that the
I would
board
agree
is
with you.
looking for equity in funding, right? Our taxpayers are willing to support sports up to this point, and I would think they're, having an awesome, incredible theater program. I choose that one because it happens to be an interest of mine. It's the one I drive to. But there's a million of them out there that may need more than what they had and they're afraid to ask for it. Well, hockey, we're renting a rink for $25,000 a year for them. If we need lighting for the theater program and it costs $5,000, well, I think maybe we shouldn't be saying no to that. You know what I'm saying in terms of equity. So that is my point.
And I want to expand this conversation a little bit because I agree with what Jenna is saying, but just as a little background for those that don't know, I've lived in multiple states. My kids have been in multiple educational settings, public school, charter school, private school, homeschool. And I was really surprised as we were looking at this year, we don't have a drama teacher in a drama department as part of the fine arts program. In every school in every state my children have been in or I have taught in, the fine arts department includes band orchestra, choir vocals, and drama theater. And you guys know me, I'm big on the counting pennies and, saving. But I think we need to start having the conversation of what our fine arts department looks like. We have a fabulous, fabulous, top-rate music department. The school play is outstanding, but the drama department is more than just the school play. It's teaching children and students how to act, how to do production, all of those pieces. And I recognize that means a staff position, that requires a department conversation and all of those things. But I really believe as we move into this next year, we need to be having a conversation of what our fine arts department looks like and what it's including. Because I really, really believe that students who are involved in drama, and by the way, I was a 4-sport athlete. All my kids were athletes, but I also had 3 kids in the play. I was in musicals. And of course, you guys heard me, I'm a choir teacher. I love fine arts. And I feel like that piece of our educational system, because it is an educational facet. And this is, again, not a you problem. This is an us discussion. I think we need to have that component. And I think it will just enhance our district all that much more to say we have this robust 3-pronged fine arts department.
And the talent is there. We have the talent already. These kids are paying to do it in other community venues when we could have a program here. And not only with the talent we have, but develop more talent, kids who didn't even know. So I think that's just our encouragement in saying we're behind you, we're for you, and where the support for that may not have laid. Oh, goodness gracious, somebody with English, I don't know. You know what I'm saying? If it may not have been here before, it's here now.
Well, when I arrived, I was surprised to see that theater and drama was a co-curricular. And I guess historically, as Matt or Rich, was there a time there was an actual position, theater position, teaching position?
Not to my knowledge.
Not in my tenure.
So this
here.
goes back decades.
Well, it helps that we have like a school board all with fresh eyes. So that's one of the benefits.
And all I was going to say is, as we, create the program of studies this year, there's probably some teachers at our high school that have backgrounds, either they, participated in college or they have a minor. We probably could, pilot and start, based on, some feedback that we might want to, something in drama.
We had a theater class run for many, many years, or was offered for, let's say, many years, and there was no interest. And that's not to say that it can't be built up by promoting it in other ways. I'm just saying that the class was not run because, but sometimes you need a synergy to get it going.
Well, I
'Cause
also
I
have
remember
lots
when
of
I was
thoughts
a
on that.
teacher there, we had a drama program and we had major productions. And so something happened that, someone left and we just didn't refill it or something, but
But I would add that a fine arts, a drama department is more than just putting on the production.
yes.
It is a curriculum. It
There's a
is
curriculum.
looking at different plays. It's looking at different forms
It's
of
tech.
acting, performance.
It's building a set. It's
It's
designing
building a
costume.
set.
Yeah.
It's running the lights. It's running the sound. I have one of my kiddos who loved doing the sound and lights for our productions because he was definitely not an on-stage kid. And you have to learn those things through time versus just that 6 weeks before a production is happening. And it translates to other things because there's lighting and sound and production in so many areas of life outside of school. as well.
And that can count as a technology credit towards graduation for those kids who don't want to take computers or whatever. I really think we have the bones, and I have lots of thoughts about why that theater class was never filled in. We can talk about that another time.
May I just say that I am 1,000% in support of your thoughts on this. In my former district, there was no department head at that point in time to represent the fine and performing arts. And when I met with all of the theater staff, the music staff, I said, who represents you? And they said, well, no one, we represent ourselves. And that's no way to build a wonderful, rich program. And so we did bring in a director of fine and performing arts, made all the difference in the world, and became as integral a component of the culture of the high school and the community as any position we ever implemented. And so we'll get there.
All right, Naomi, you are next in the packet.
Okay. I had a question about sports and co-curriculars, but I think Jenna covered it, so I'm gonna skip it. I had questions about textbooks, and that one got answered. Oh, I had the same question for equipment. I noticed there were a bunch of equipment line items for replacing things. And my parentheses here, I have calculators, headphones, flash drives, etc. And I was wondering if there's a plan, if there's a cycle, or if it's kind of need based and we do it.
The only set plan was in the math department, and they were trying to do class sets with new graphing calculators. So over the last 10 years, you went back and saw all these meetings. We'd asked for 1 or 2 class sets. We're almost at the end of that. In fact, this year, the math department only asked for 1 as opposed to 2 we had last year. In addition, the science department decided that they wanted to ask for calculators this year for some of the classes, graphing calculators. So we are going to, in the budget, there is a request for a class set of calculators. It's gonna, many of the students have them themselves, but they sometimes are varied. They might be 3 or 4 different calculators. By having it in the science class, it will be easier for the teacher to sort of teach with just one. The keys are all the same in that sense. So I think that's why.
Yeah, a lot of my questions already got. Yeah, I'm done. That was. Everybody covered everything I had.
So I only have 2, and one is just about the health, just looking for information. The health PE equipment replacement says to purchase new and safer equipment for the weight room, as well as 6 new AED trainers, which I think is great. What are we looking to replace?
It's a lat pull down machine.
Oh, right on.
In the weight room, the cables are frayed,
That's not good.
so it's a safety issue.
All right. And then to the shock of absolutely no one, I am obviously in full support of the music department's request for replacement marching drums over the 5-year plan. Just to give some clarity on that, first of all, I know that music providers or equipment providers are really good about working with schools and giving discounted prices. It's, the last set of equipment was donated 20 years ago by UNH, which means who knows when the last time we bought anything for them, for the marching band. I welcome anybody to strap on a 32-inch bass drum and march just once down a football field, especially equipment from 20 years ago, where now they're shifting over to carbon fiber. And I have friends who marched in the percussion line in high school who have had to have back surgery, who have problems with their shoulders because of how heavy that equipment is. So it's not just, just having upgraded equipment, but it's also a health concern for students who are marching with old equipment. And I know band directors are notorious at MacGyvering things together. I don't go anywhere without my duct tape and rubber bands anytime I travel with my band, and I'm sure they've done a great job of keeping that stuff together, but drums do take a beating, obviously. And that was bad, sorry. So that stuff, it's, I fully support that. And just to go back to, band and chorus. We talk about band a lot, but we also have a thriving choral program. We do get lumped into that we're kind of both. We're a graded class and we're also an extracurricular activity. We are both of those things, which makes us kind of unique. We're also the only class where 10 to 15 times a year we have to publicly demonstrate student proficiency in front of hundreds of people. So, and again, we do an okay job of providing for them, but I feel that we don't do enough for what is arguably one of the strongest music programs in the state. So I think anything we can do to help them is a good thing. So that's my 2 cents on that.
I just want to piggyback on what you're going to say because those drums are heavy. I happen to know because my child is a competitive swimmer and a drummer. And the only time he complains about his shoulders hurting is during marching band season. And it's because he's out there marching. I think that drum weighs 3/4 what he weighs. And he literally, when I told him it was in the budget, I said, and I bet new equipment will be lighter. And he's like, well, then maybe I can do band next year.
Yeah, the new equipment is so much more ergonomic, and we're also in the process of ordering new equipment, so it's way overdue, and it's for the kids' safety, really.
Well, I want to thank you so much. You guys have like the most detailed budget of everyone that has to come up to us. So that's why you got loaded with questions, but I appreciate how thoroughly you answered the questions. Throw it to you guys if you want to say one last thing.
I'd like to just say I appreciate you advocating for the students and families of Merrimack. I appreciate your suggestions. I enjoy being here for this time. I think it's nice to have a good working relationships, and thank you.
I just want to say, having worked with you personally, I just turned my mic. Having worked with you personally, Mr. Z, I don't think I've had the opportunity to work with you personally, but I just want to say I appreciate the fact that you are for students. You work hard to make sure students have what they need. You care about them. That is so evident. I'm sure that's also true of Mr. Z. It's true of the other people at the high school. And that is literally everything, especially in that time period of students' lives where they need to feel like people are on their team. To know that you guys are on their team is huge. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a great night.
Thank you.
All right. Well, it's time for our district team.
So I start, but so I didn't have any questions, probably because I am on the building planning, the planning and the building committee, and so we get updated a lot. But I think that just want to say what we just said to those guys. I'm very grateful that we have a BA who oversees so much of the funding for our district and does such a wonderful job, and has been here for a very long time. So he has the history, the knowledge, and he works. He's very transparent. You can ask him a question. He's always going to give you an honest answer. And I think I really appreciate that. And also his depth of knowledge is incredible.
Yeah, man, you got to write like a memoir with all the history so that,
How do you know I haven't been doing that for the past couple of years?
That is going to be a New York Times bestseller. I know
There
it.
you go. There you go.
Who wouldn't want to read that?
All right. Well, I will turn it over to Bill, Amy, and Matt if you want to make an opening statement.
Let me give a brief overview, if you don't mind.
Yes, go ahead.
The district budget has kind of a vague title to it. It's pretty vague for something that's around $30 million. Okay. So it's composed of a lot of items that are primarily contractual obligations. It's not a lot of contingency or what ifs or discretionary funds in here. We have things like the retirement incentive. You're contractually obligated to provide a retirement incentive for at least 7 teachers, up to 7 teachers. You can go higher if you deem it necessary, but we have to have that. It's around $430,000 every single year, right then and there. We have a lot of items that are testing and scoring. Amy will get into that. We have a new initiative for next year coming on board. We have a lot of areas that are the support staff improvement. There were a lot of questions on that as far as, what's this $50,000 or, let me get my thing up, or 120,000 or 150. Those are all in the teacher contract in Article 3.1. and they're all listed there. So that's kind of a boilerplate have to do. The contracted services line is around $227,000. That's Power School, that's internet, that's school messenger, that's some of the back end software of our computer system. That's a lot of things. The nurses program, SNAP, that's in there too. There's a lot of things that are in there that are contracted services. Infinite Visions, the program that actually does the budget and keeps track of the finances and everything like that. So that's around $200,000. We do look at evaluating everything every single year. In particular, our school messaging program. We're looking at that right now to see if we could get something better for a little bit less money, just to see if that will be appropriate. And we've had some issues with it this year. I don't know if it's growing pains or a change in management of the company, but we're going to have a sit down with them and we're going to have a little chat. So we'll see how that goes. We have items such as school board advertising. I don't know what we call it, school board advertising, because advertising is, we call it that because that's the way it was 30 years ago, right? And there's a lot of that going on. So school board advertising, it's advertising for new positions, right? We have the auditors that we have to do every single year. We have legal services, school district meeting, a lot of office stuff, telephone printing, whatever. That doesn't add up to that much. One of the big tickets is the transportation, $2.6 million. As a while ago, we renegotiated an extension. It's a 5% increase, but the most important thing is there's no fuel cap. So diesel can go up to $25 a gallon, and we're not going to pay anymore. And when you look at surrounding districts and what they've negotiated versus where we are, we're in a good spot, believe me, because a lot of those districts, anything over $1.20, you pay the extra. And that's a frightening thing for me. I like certainty. This gives me certainty. It gives, makes me sleep at night. So that's why it was a good thing. We have, of course, the health insurances, which is probably the biggest line in the entire budget. We have an 8.8% increase. I didn't take the whole 8.8% increase. I took around half of it because I want to go back, and now that we have all the staff settled and everybody's in their place, and take a look at the mix again. The mix has basically stayed kind of stable. The number of family plans, the number of single plans, the number of two-person plans, that can change in years. But the last few years, everything's kind of remained the same. The number of people taking the buyout, the number of people who are going for the least expensive plan. I forget the name of it, but it is a plan that is basically a very high deductible plan, which is great if you're young. When you're not old like me, where you need to go to the doctors, right? So that's a real good option for everybody to try and save us some money and let them have a good benefit package. We also have, the dental insurance, the New Hampshire retirement system in there. That's a lot of money, and it has historically been a lot of money. I've got a contribution rate. I love this sheet. Since 1971, what districts have paid for as far as retirement goes. I mean, it started off back in 71 for teachers at like 3%. We're at 19% now. Last year we were at 20. We actually dropped a point down. Same thing with other staff members. It's been around equal, but it used to be 2.8% that we would pay, and now it's upwards of around 14-15%. So I guess a lot, because this has been a point of frustration with a lot of us on this side, and I know the municipal side with police and fire and regular employees, that this is really something that we watch closely, because back in the day, a decision was made back in the early 80s to drop down the rate for teachers to not even a percentage point, 0.88%. And that traveled along for quite a number of years until around 2008 hit. That's when the medical subsidy was going to be sunsetting, And so everybody left at around before 2008. Everybody retired to get that. And then ever since, because of that mass exodus due to the health subsidy benefit going away, the rates have increased phenomenally. Like I said, we're at 19.64 for teachers, regular employees around 14%. But when you look at police and fire, they're at police and fire are at around 30% right now of their gross salary, which, when you're dealing with the town budget, and you're dealing 30% of everybody's salary has to go into the New Hampshire retirement system, that's a huge number, and it's a big burden for the town to bear.
It is.
So I think a lot of it has to do with the lack of actuarial expertise in this area. I think they thought in the boom in the 80s that the wave was going to ride forever, but it doesn't do that. So they kind of were not very credible as far as their solvency goes. So that's something that's pretty much been stabilized by now. So I don't think we're going to have to worry about any huge spikes in the future, but it is a significant part of the operating budget. We also have the debt service. The only one we have left is for can anybody say it?
That was one of my questions.
It
the
was,
middle
I know it
school.
was. I know it was.
Actually, it was more of a comment because my question was, wait, is this the last year we have
This
to pay
is
it?
the
And then I
last
had in
year.
big capital letters, yay!
Yay. We opened that school in September of 2004, just barely. I think the last piece of furniture was going in there when the kids were rolling up in the buses. And so, this is the year. After that, there's $775,000 that we're not going to have to pay for the bond. It was a 20-year bond. A couple of years ago, we also retired the high school edition, the 97 edition. The 2000 edition, the 3-story edition. And that was a 20-year bond too on $6 million, which I really couldn't understand. But, this is something that's going to be retired next year. So it comes off of after next year. So it comes off of the budget there, and then it's going to be done for us. So that's basically kind of an overview of what's in there. You really can't see there's anything really exciting. We're talking about drama, we're talking about this, we're talking about SEL, we're talking about real educational stuff. Then you get to the district, and it's like, it kind of pales in comparison.
Oh, don't say that, Matt. This is exciting too.
It's not, you're just being nice, I mean, it's
May I
not
make
that
a comment
exciting.
to that point, though? Here's where Matt's expertise really pays dividends, particularly for students and staff. It's the insurances, it's the legal expenses, it's the unemployment, it's the retirement funding, it's the negotiating of utility rates and the bus contracts. He's negotiated such that another 2, 3, or 4 years, Matt, the utility rate. A lot of the things that are in the district budget are subject to double-digit inflation. When he has negotiated an electric rate that I think will save us hundreds of thousands of dollars. He's negotiated a bus contract that is represents a 5% increase, which is a very modest increase given the price of vehicles, insurances, wages, fuel costs. It's pretty much unheard of these days to have a bus contract without a fuel adjustment clause. In my former job, that meant sometimes looking at potentially a $50,000 to $75,000 increase in the contract price, but not here. And the importance of that is that those dollars are able to go to the direct instructional component of the budget, and that's the real significance of how good Matt is at what he does.
Well, on that note, I think I'll end my little, introduction here, and we can, at your whatever your pleasure is, we can get to questions.
It's up to you if you want us to go ahead and go ask our questions or if you'd like to say something.
Well, just know, and I didn't mean to interrupt Amy, but we are committed in our positions to make great things happen for students and staff, and always, always, always making decisions, as you heard, I think, tonight and previous nights, basing our decisions on what is in the best interest of students. We want a curriculum that meets the standards, that is updated, that represents what's happening in the period in which we are living in, not 10, 15, 20 years ago. I think we're headed in the right direction. I don't mean to just generalize here, but between Matt and Amy, and we have an outstanding, as you know, HR person in Melissa, I think we're really positioned for this school system to take off. I really feel that, and we talk about it often. Amy, I'll turn it over to you because I've editorialized enough here.
No, I am ready for your questions. I am actually really excited to talk about iReady. I know it's not as exciting as health insurance and dental coverage, but I really am excited to talk
I
about
think it
iReady.
is. I would disagree with that.
So why don't you go ahead and talk about I do have a
Okay.
question that's not in my packet
Sure.
for iReady, but I want you to talk about it first.
Okay. Laura, do we want to talk about your question about fourth grade versus fifth grade?
Nope.
Okay. All right.
I have the other question I can ask after we talk about iReady.
Okay. So this summer, when we had our goal setting meeting, one of the first exciting conversations that I was able to be a part of is how are we going to maximize student learning, and how are we going to be able to clearly identify the gaps that we have, and how are we going to systematically fill them. And after that goal setting meeting and moving forward, I spent a lot of time thinking about assessment tools. I was a special ed teacher, I was a math teacher, and collecting data and really making data informed decisions is really important. And there is really, when you look at the types of tools that we were talking about, the gold standard is really one of the three. So you've got iReady, STAR, and then you've got NWEA and AIMSweb to some degree. So we took a look at all of those as a committee. We formed a committee. We talked about it at the Curriculum Instruction and Assessment Committee. But we're really looking at a narrow focus of, we really wanted a tool that could serve three purposes. So our screening tool, so being able to identify students very quickly at any time, to identify the students that really need an intensive intervention immediately. Then you've got your diagnostic testing, so being able to identify the strengths and needs of every student, and then your progress monitoring. And that really limits then what you're looking at next. And Jenna already talked about this, but one of the terrific features of iReady that you can buy or not buy, and in this budget, we've included the individualized learning paths. So once a student takes a screening tool or the diagnostic test, it then creates a individualized path for that student that they can work at their own level. iReady also has some built-in accessibility features, like it'll read questions to them. It will allow access at the universal design for learning level. The other thing that I'm really excited about is being able to, the reports and things that teachers can run. And I know that Jenna spoke about it, but each student gets their own path, but then the teacher also has a platform that if they're going to run small groups, or they're going to do within our multi-tiered system of support that Fern and Heather talked about, there are ready-made lessons for groups of students as well. So they can pull reports for their class to say, all of these students need work on this particular phoneme, and then here is a cadre of lessons that they can pull from. And they have more than one, because as you know, it often takes students with learning disabilities or learning gaps multiple times to be able to fill them in. So once we went through all of that, we currently use STAR. We've been using STAR for a long time. Matt was great, and we won't be purchasing that. So I know that I think Naomi's question was, it's $136,000, which is a lot. Moving forward, I think there is a gap of about $30,000 between STAR and iReady will also replace a strange test that we give at the middle school. I shouldn't have probably said strange. Probably should have used a different adjective. I'm
Is
sorry.
that an
Karina
acronym?
Turan. Yeah. I just said it on live TV.
You're safe here, but there's 1,000 people watching.
Sorry about that. Adam and Kathy are gonna, but it is this strange test that we give called the grade, which is, it's on a Scantron. It's very antiquated, so we'll be replacing that. We won't be renewing that. And then we're also looking at, from Jason's budget, are there some other tools that we have been purchasing that maybe iReady can replace? So things like, we buy a lot of IXL licenses. We buy a lot of Reflex. We buy a lot of other tools that as they come up, Jason and I have talked about, once we get iReady up and going, if we can transition people or teachers, staff, families to just using that tool at least for a couple of years, it'll really help us to identify where our gaps are. And I'm sure you can really tell that Ken's excited about music. I'm really excited about testing. Testing. Well, data that you can collect to be able to really meet the needs of students.
And I just want to say that I'm sorry.
No,
I didn't
you're
mean to
go ahead.
jump in, but
Go ahead.
I work in a school where they use iReady, and while I'm not an academic instructor, I sit in on those grade level teams sometimes, and I hear them talking specifically about the data that comes from iReady. And just what you said, I found out that these kids in my class are specifically lacking this one specific thing. I'm going to pull these tools. I'm going to load the iReady, their individual paths with these things. And they use the data, and it translates into meaningful learning for students. It's so powerful to see it happen, and the teachers are excited about it because they're not just trying to, they have an objective way of knowing and collecting that data and then working off of that data to improve instruction. And that is so powerful. So I'm really excited about iReady.
And just to add, this initial investment, we have about 36,000 with professional development that goes along with the implementation. And Curriculum Associates has been wonderful to work with. Within next year, we will have an account manager that is just assigned to Merrimack, and they will come and do on-site professional development in each one of the buildings. We will have a kickoff at the beginning of the school year, which is about a 3-hour overview of the tool, but then they will go out to each individual building because we really want this to be successful. And when you're doing it in a smaller setting, each of the building leaders will be able to have their person come and pick the day of the week that they're there, and have them meet with each one of their PLTs, meet with special education teachers, meet with our Title I. So there will be a really comprehensive professional learning rollout, which we know is so important when you're taking on a new initiative like this. So that cost won't continue after this year. We're hoping, that to maybe, even if we need some of that, it won't be at the cost of $6,000 per building.
So I just wanted to say, so iReady has, been in existence for many, many years. And so I think when we think about this budget, I think maybe in the past, people concentrated too much on the bottom line versus what were our needs. And it feels like now we're really trying to concentrate on what are our needs. And this is a need. This is, all of our goals and everything we talked about goes back to understanding data, giving teachers an opportunity to really be able to assess the data and have it at their fingertips. And so it's something that we should have done a long time ago. It's just, we're here now.
May I just say, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I wanted to jump in because you said talking about the bottom line versus needs, and I wanted to say that we've talked a bunch about how this is also helping the bottom line, and having looked, this is the first time I've looked over this, and it was a daunting task, and coming to an understanding of it, the amount of work that went into this budget and the amount of care that went into this budget. And I would say that it was very much focused on the bottom line because we're talking about all these new things that we're adding, and it's only overall a 2% increase of the budget requested over last year. And almost all of that 2% are these new programs that we're implementing. Everything else is like so close to level funded, and I feel like a great deal of care is being taken for that bottom line. And so I just wanted to throw that out for the reason I asked my question about iReady was not because I was wondering whether or not it was the right thing. It was because I knew how much of the right thing it was. And I wanted to make sure that we're explaining that, yes, we're making this investment, but that's what it is. It's an investment.
So, question and comment. First of all, what is the ongoing expense after the initial investment? Approximately.
Yeah, my guess is it'll probably be, the licenses are by number of students. So we have 2 buildings that are over 500 students. So those will be about 22,000 moving forward, and then 18,000 for the lower elementary. So they do it based on a band. If you have between 351 licenses and 500, you pay a certain amount. So my guess is it'll be right around 100,000. And if after a couple of years we feel like we don't need the individualized learning path, it's about half to 2/3 of the cost to just have the diagnostic assessment portion of iReady. My guess is once we adopt it and get going, teachers will really see that it is helpful to them being able to provide really targeted intervention to groups of students while maybe they're doing a small group. That student can be at a station. And it goes, I just, and I'm sure you already know this, but it really is a coordinated effort. I work really closely with Jason, who's the director of technology. We're looking at the one-to-one, what makes sense for kids. How do we, use technology in meaningful ways? That's where part of iReady comes in, working with Heather. I know you haven't had a proper presentation related to Foundations, which is the new phonics program that she talked about. And we had a parent that came and talked about it. Those are really coordinated efforts at the tier 1 level. And I feel like iReady is another part of that. Having a really strong progress monitoring tool that teachers can believe in and are excited about the data is just another part of how we can make the improvements that I know that you all want and we all really want as well.
And I want to, and that leads me to my comment. So when we talked about it last summer, of course, I went into research, nut mode because that's who I am. And there were the two things that I really loved was the ongoing assessment. So let me kind of explain why that appeals to me. Is a standardized test is 1 day, 2 day snapshot. This is ongoing for the teacher to see how the student is progressing, where they are, where they need to go, and the plan is individualized. Now, that's the second thing that I really love about this. We have spent a lot of time talking tonight about learning gaps and students who need interventions, but there are students who are very gifted academically, but have a weak area that can get overlooked in standardized testing, where iReady will identify that and say, this is a kid who needs a little bit extra time either in math fluency or reading fluency or an area like that they can compensate for in standardized testing and things like that. And so the iReady just really will help all students at all academic levels, at all potentials. And as a teacher, I love the idea of being able to have those individual plans. This is why I'll probably continue to support that tag on piece, because then I know each student is getting what they need and I get to partner with them and their family to meet that need. So I kind of wanted to bring, yes, I 100% behind data-driven decisions, but I kind of wanted to give that personal touch. Families are going to see their kids truly having what they need as a student and not just this is what all students are getting. And we talk about differentiation, but this is just like another tool to help teachers give that solid differentiation and see how it goes throughout the year. We don't have to wait another year for testing to find out. And I love that component.
Yeah,
about this.
the component where every time the student is on the device and they're logging minutes, you're gathering data about their progress. So it's not just 3 times a year, which is what we do with STAR, and that again is a snapshot, and STAR doesn't have the additional component. Every time a student is interacting with iReady, it's gathering information about where their strengths are, where their needs are, and how they can tweak their individualized learning path, to give them what they need. I also, we've talked a lot about learning gaps. There are some students that need enrichment that if a teacher is doing small group instruction, you can imagine if you have a student that is really struggling to read, the teacher may make the choice, to work more with that student, understandably. But we also have students at the other end of the spectrum, our gifted and talented population, and this tool also is responsive. It's adaptive, so if a student is in 3rd grade and they're scoring in the 6th grade, they give them 6th grade material. So it is, just a really robust tool for this time and place.
I just wanted to say one more thing about it is we're spending all these technology dollars to keep up our one-to-one. This is another way to utilize, make the most of that money, right? We're investing so heavily in one-on-one. This iReady allows us to capitalize on that investment in a meaningful, very focused way to increase learning. It's not like we're going to get these computers and then, I guess we'll figure out how to use them. And we will. Yeah. But with iReady, there's a very meaningful reason, and there's a very specific way that that's going to be utilized moving forward. So it makes me happy to know that those two things are happening at the same time.
If I could say one thing.
Yeah.
Anybody want to talk property and liability insurance? I'm sorry, I'm only kidding. You see, for me, this is kind of exciting because I'm looking at a bottom line that's, we already talked about technology and that piece and how important it is. That was $1 million line item. Everybody's kind of looking at it like, whoa, isn't this something else? But we're up 1.99%. So it's $1.7 million, of which 1 million was sitting over here a couple nights ago. And then there are other curriculum issues. This budget really seems to, with everything combined, it really seems to get us forward in a short amount of time. The money's in the right spots, and it's the right amount to get what we need to get done as a school system into the future. So that's what really kind of pleases me about it.
And I would add that, I do think I said this last week. Our staff doesn't just spend because the money is there. There's some things like the iReady piece, we have no choice on to the penny what that's going to cost. But I do see a frugality in our district that takes into account our taxpayers. And if they can, they do. And when they do, there's a refund back to the taxpayers. And so I was going to say the same thing next week. Yeah. Thursday. What day of the week is it? Having school out yesterday is just totally messed with my brain. Thursday, that it's 1.99%, even with these big ticket necessary items. So I think that's, as a school board, that's what we need to be communicating as we talk about the budget. Now, switching gears to my question. Lori brought it up earlier about attrition, and kind of wish Melissa was here because she's the expert on this. How many teachers have resigned and retired since August 2021, and how many have we hired? So what's that ratio looking like?
We have had 55 teachers who have either resigned or retired since August 1st of 2021. We've hired 40 staff members. We still have 4 vacancies. We have tech ed at the middle school, a special ed teacher, special ed coordinator, a social studies teacher at the high school.
And I believe, as we have talked in the past, one of the things central office is doing is ensuring that we have all the right people in the right seats on the bus. But if there's a vacancy that doesn't need to be filled for whatever reason, or that there is ability to move people around, we are focused on that.
We always have that ability. That is a management prerogative to
Yes, it is.
reassign people.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
All right, that's the only district question I have. I think next in the packet is Naomi.
All right. We have already talked about my first 2, and some other ones were my like newbie. Wait, I'm not sure what this line means questions, which
Yeah.
I'm sure Matt can. Matt, you can answer them.
I
for
can
me.
answer this. Thank you. I feel valued now. Yeah. So your first. Go ahead.
It was the what does the transfer to food service line item
Yeah.
mean? I
That's-
suspect I know, but I want to hear it.
Yeah. Food service is a special revenue fund, so it's supposed to be self-supporting. So the revenues that come in from the USDA and then the state milk program and then the food service lunch sales is supposed to be equal or greater than the expenditures. So you have a little bit of surplus, which you can automatically retain in that item. During the COVID years, when things, we shut down and we weren't serving, but we had to keep people on the payroll. That was part of one of the requirements to receiving ESSER funds, that you couldn't do massive layoff of folk, So we had them there and everything like that until we activated the lunch program again, when people would come by the high school and pick up a bag lunch during the day. And so this is if Dave Zicki, the food service director, if he's running in a deficit, this is something that we would use to offset that. I think a couple of years ago, we transferred $139,000 into that. But in my prior, 19 years, we've never used it. We've always had a surplus in food service. And what we use that surplus for is, if Dave Zicki has a freezer or something that's rather old and it's costs around $75,000, we use that money to purchase the freezer with. So, like I said, it's kind of supporting, but in sometimes, at least one time, it wasn't because of, circumstances really kind of beyond our control. So there's a dollar in there as a placeholder.
I figured it was a placeholder because I saw the dollar.
Oh, you're not going to do a lot with a dollar,
Exactly.
right?
My next question was, and I completely understand if the answer to this is I can't tell you in public session, but I was curious why there was so much in legal services in 21-22, and just is this year looking to be closer to budget, or is it just one of those where it varies widely and we just have that number in there as a placeholder?
Legal services can vary greatly. A lot of it is related to any, certainly litigation. Could be grievance related, although we tend to have very few grievances from the staff. Much of it is special education related in terms of representing the school district in hearings and mediation sessions, you name it. So it can vary greatly. And if there's one thing I've noticed over the years, it could be 100,000 one year and 350,000 the next year. You just don't know what is facing you in terms of liability and litigious action.
Yeah, a couple years ago, case in point, we had a lawsuit that cost us around 36 grand. So that was kind of like one issue, kind of toppled the whole legal line. But I've never really seen it climb over that far over 100,000, and when I've seen it as low as like $30,000 a year. So it all depends, like Bill said.
Yeah, I figured. Thank you. I was just
Yeah.
curious. And then my I think you actually may have inadvertently answered this one for me earlier, but I just wasn't sure what the lines meant, like 3.1A,
Oh, yeah,
3.1B, and so what do they go for, and why did we spend so much less on them in 21-22? And I'm guessing the answer is COVID. But I'll let you tell
Yeah,
story.
the answer is COVID. This is in the teacher's contract, and so it's the $51,000 for general professional development activities such as district workshops, seminars, other activities to reimburse teachers for only expenses for these professional development activities have been met. Another $75,000 for to reimburse individual certified teachers for professional growth activities. There's a professional development committee that looks at all of this, so they don't get reimbursed unless they go through the approval process with this committee. Everything is looked at. There's $120,000 in there for certified teachers for professional growth to be applied towards graduate studies, and so those are for graduate courses. There's also $150,000 in there, which was the 0.21. I don't know if you have that one here, for district initiatives. So if we have something that we need done, it's almost like we used to call this pay per performance, but it's not that anymore. It's more or less district needs. We have a pool of money to allot to teachers in the system to get us where we need to be. Sometimes they come up with the ideas and they present it, and they have a binder or something like that they do. That all goes before the used to be the Professional Educators Review Council. I think it's called something else now. I don't know what it is. Yeah. Okay. That's something. Yeah. Service Learning Project. Okay. So yeah, it goes through a Service Learning Project. So those are in the contract, and those will only change via bargaining.
Thank you. And then I was curious what the school board contingency line meant,
Well,
and why are we cutting it?
that was I think that was my idea. During the COVID years, I wasn't sure, what we were going to get, when we were going to get it. ESSER was kind of brand new. And just in case something really fell flat on our faces, we were looking to put $100,000 in there, just in case. We haven't had to touch it, and I think we're past the COVID issues, and we're looking not to we're not looking to continue that line. So
Savings account.
yeah, correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ken?
All questions have been answered. I love a lot of things about this budget, and I love what Naomi said about, care was taken into the bottom line. I really do feel that way because of just such a minimal increase, considering all of these so important programs that we're looking to implement. So I appreciate having everything answered and really well laid out. And yeah, thanks.
So as we move into Thursday night's meeting, I just want to encourage everyone, not just Ken and Naomi, but everyone to look at last year's meeting. It gives you a good idea of kind of the structure, how we move forward with the budget discussion, things that you want to see line items you want to reduce or increase. That will be the time to do it. We'll also be discussing the warrant articles that Matt has sent us preliminary work on, and so we'll be discussing those as well. So that the structure of that meeting is really helpful to go back and look at how we did last year, and come prepared. I do.
Well, you don't have to say it right this instant, but if you want to like email
Yeah,
it out
I'll
so
send
that
it
I
out.
don't have to try to figure that out.
But with that said, I will open up to public comment if anyone would like to come and speak on agenda items. All right.
Failing
well,
that, may I just say, like,
yes, go ahead.
thank you very much for your very relevant and thoughtful questions. These are excellent, excellent meetings.
That would be January 11th, 2022.
Thank you.
All right. Well, with that in mind, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion made by Ken, seconded by Naomi. All those in favor say aye.
Hi.
Pass 500. Thank you and good night.